Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today with Networking in a Minute. I am super excited to be here today as we have been talking about this. Once again, I'm Dawn Velinoff with DMV Consulting and Networking. I'm really excited today because Networking in a Minute is really brought about as a passion of mine because we all know we don't want to be on Zoom forever. And it's really be able to, right? Like, it seems like we spend our days on Zoom. And one after another. And this is really supposed to be about bringing experts to the table, telling their story, and with everything happening really around the world. I'm not even going to say here locally in Michigan, Lansing, Detroit, whatnot, but really happening globally with the pandemic. But also the pandemic brought about health equity, cancel culture, race relations. And as a mother of a biracial daughter, there was so much that I learned. And it was so shocking to me. And it made me think how many other people out there and individuals didn't know. I didn't know about Juneteenth. I didn't know about Black Wall Street. And I immediately thought, how are other people being educated? Because I know I wasn't educated in school, not even in college. And so I thought with 4th of July in July being celebrating our independence and then learning about Juneteenth, I was like, wow, okay. And so I thought this month it would really be about moving forward with networking in a minute. I thought, you know what, let's talk about history versus real history and where does it start? So with that, I have my guest, Kamau. And so thank you, Kamau. Kamau and I go back, I don't know, about
years.
10 years ago. We ran a group therapy class together. And when I was really trying to sort things out for myself as a mother, as a woman, being white and trying to understand this, Kamau, you came to mind. And because you've always been true to you. And I've always known your story, not your full story, but I've always known you as Kamau. And I've always known you to have these true beliefs and already know these things that I'm learning. And so I had picked up the phone and called Kamau and had asked if, you could be on Networking in a Minute and you can enlighten us with your journey along the way. And is this how you were raised, or was there something that brought us here? So I just want to tell you a little bit about Kamau and where he comes from. So, and what he does, because he's got a really interesting background. And I thought
I've done a number of things.
Yeah.
In my little life.
A lot of things, a lot of really cool things. So, and it's weird because I ran into him. Not that anyone cares, but I'm a huge LL Cool J fan. And I went to the concert. There was Kamau playing at the concert. I'm like, what? Anyways, so Kamau, he's a father of 3 and a devoted family man. He taught middle school and high school history and social studies in the Metro Detroit area. And he worked with families to improve parenting and social skills. Kamau values empowering his community and works as the program director for Black education and legacy, with focuses on financial literacy as well as education on financial tools and resources that help with wealth creation and generational wealth. Kamau loves history and making the connections that tell the stories from her past and the present. Kamau is also an accomplished musician. Well, hello, LL Cool J. He's performed across the U.S. and around the world with aspiring and established artists. And so thank you once again, Kamau. I know I've said a mouthful already, but I really want to thank you for doing this and telling your story, because so much is happening in our world today. And so,
well, I appreciate you for thinking of me. I'll start out by saying I am by no means a professional historian. I just love history. I love the connections that we can make that tell the story, just like you mentioned in my bio. We tell a story, and unfortunately or fortunately, history always repeats itself. and we can either learn the lessons or we can get smacked upside the head every time that we don't learn a lesson. And so I'm excited to be here just to share my experiences in terms of what I know and what I've learned. So yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm excited to have you here. Well, can we start a little bit from the beginning and what took you
Sure.
on this journey, and where did your education begin? Did it begin at home? Did it begin in college? Did it begin from friends? Where did your journey begin? And for those that are listening, how do they begin their journey? How do they get those answers? How do they begin to study and to learn more? Just be educated.
So, yeah. So I should start by saying, there's no right or wrong in history. There's fact and opinion and truth and false. So where you start, there's nothing wrong with how you start. What's wrong is the history that what you know of history, allowing that to be the only thing you know. And so anytime you're talking about history, there are multiple facets, multiple ways to view a particular event. And so we have to look at it based on facts and not not personal opinion. These things are historical facts. And so for me personally, I went to Detroit Public Schools. I was born and raised in Detroit. I feel like I had a pretty decent education. My kindergarten through 8th grade was primarily in one school. I went to one high school. But the reality is, even though the school was predominantly Black, the only thing that we learned about history was the start of the process of enslavement. Typically, our history started with Black people being enslaved and how we were freed by the Emancipation Proclamation, and then we fought against oppression and discrimination in the Civil Rights Movement, and Martin Luther King was killed, and Black people are here today, and that's pretty much the extent of what we learn about history. Oh, and Black History Month. I can't forget about Black History Month, and you learn.
And that came later. And that came later too.
Yeah. And you're right. And I was born in the '70s, and I have a fairly decent memory, but I remember always hearing about the first Black person to do this and the first Black person to do that, and you psychologically you start to value who you are, and I think everybody does this. You value who you are based on your experiences and things that you learn. So here I am as a young Black boy. The only people that I see who are successful, who have been successful, are the people that have been the first to do, the first to integrate a white school system, the first to be hired in a all white law firm or something of that nature. So, but you don't. So let me kind of forward the answer to your question. I didn't really start to learn. I had a high school teacher. His name was Mr. Lynch. And I didn't really like him. He was abrasive, he was kind of rude, but he always talked about Malcolm X. Always talked about Malcolm X. Posters on the wall. Pretty much any quote he can say, there was something about Malcolm X. And at the same time, this was late '80s, early '90s. At the same time, I was a huge hip hop fan, and the artists that I listened to in hip hop were conscious artists like Public Enemy, X-Clan, artists like that. And then in the early '90s, groups like Brand Nubians. And for me, I always say, if anybody that really knows me to have heard me say that hip hop saved my life. I don't know where I would be had it not been for groups like X-Clan and Public Enemy, because those artists gave me a direction that I didn't have. And so with my teacher talking about Malcolm X and me also hearing about Malcolm X and these lyrics, that kind of drew me closer to him. And I read the autobiography of Malcolm X when I was in high school. And that's what started my path. Learning about his struggles, learning about the fact that he came from Detroit. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that is awesome. And then the fact that a teacher is who inspired you, and then you became a teacher to inspire other youth.
Yeah. And to be honest, that
I never
wasn't
knew
even
that.
part of
That's
the plan.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
when that wasn't part of the plan, when I started college, to be a teacher, but drawing on those experiences that I had as a student and realizing that I can be impactful, as a teacher, as a model for other people who look like me. That's what kind of took me along that path, to be an educator. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
So
awesome. So what happened after that? So you read the autobiography, you started down the path. Did it change how you started looking at things, how you
oh,
started,
absolutely.
who you started hanging out with,
Yeah.
what college you went to, what you decided to do after school? Did you
Yeah.
learn things like, did you know about Black Wall Street? Did you know about Juneteenth? Did you know about those things prior to, or was that when you became an adult?
Absolutely not.
So
Absolutely
that
not.
isn't just a white culture, that's an
Oh,
American culture.
absolutely. And that's the thing that we have to understand about us living in this country, of how white supremacy and racism impacts not only Black people, but it also it also not burdens, but stifles the growth and the progress of white people, because you can't deny a group of people an existence and not think that the denial of their existence doesn't impact you in some way. If you consider just thinking about music, any form of popular music in this country, Black people had a hand in it. Period.
Oh
Black
yeah,
people had a hand in blues,
yeah, yeah,
gospel,
yeah,
jazz,
yeah.
right? Any form of American classic music or rock and roll, any form of American music, Black people had a hand in that. And so if you remove Black people from the equation, what do you have? You have you have a culture that doesn't have the ability to express itself in a way that it's been doing for the last 150 years musically. I'm just talking about in the area of music.
Right.
You know what I mean? The impact
Yeah.
that rock and roll has had on American culture, the impact that jazz has had on American culture. You have to attribute that to the Black people's contribution to that art form. And so to answer your question, yeah, no, it doesn't only it doesn't only impact people of color or Black people in particular, but it also impacts white people. And so no, I did not. We, like I said in the beginning, we just learned the basics. But so for me, understand, kind of having that eye opening about Malcolm X, that motivated me. And to be honest, I was in high school. I didn't read a lot. I read a little bit. But when I got to college and I got connected with people who are like minded, people who are really sharp and focused, people who I'm still friends with to this day. One of them is a historian who does Detroit tours. He does tours all around the country, but he lives in Detroit, so he does tours based on the legacy of Black people in Detroit.
Oh, that's
And
cool. Hey,
he's
give him
been
a
on the
shout
news.
out.
Yeah, definitely. His name is Jamon Jordan. You can check him out if you search him on Google. You'll see it's Black Scroll Network tours,
Yeah,
and
that's good because that's a way
he's
to
a
promote Black business for sure, and
absolutely,
to
yeah.
to
And it
get
would be
people.
good too because everything, because of COVID,
Yeah,
everything is kind of shut down. So just I'm sure he's finding a way to kind of adjust to that. So go check him out. But absolutely one of the most knowledgeable people I know about. He's a mind of information, not just about Black culture, but everything. And so, but because of his love of Black culture and our association, I have a couple other friends who all we did on college nights, we'd be in our room with books. We take a book out on a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday night, and we talk about the implications of people's, or you can't see it, people's history of the United States. We talk about Black studies from uh, um, uh, Maulana Karenga. Just we find things to discuss and to make connections between what happened then and what we're doing now. That kind of leads on that same path or strays us away. And so
so you
I didn't
went.
find out about Black Wall Street until I was in college.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then you learn not Black Wall Street isn't an anomaly. This happens
No,
multiple
I.
times. So there are a number of self-sufficient independent, self-sustaining, successful Black communities that were prevalent all throughout the South, primarily because of racism and discrimination. And
Yeah.
due to that discrimination, they had to find a way to be independent and self-sufficient. And because these successful Black communities were so successful, the neighboring white communities did not like that and found a reason to destroy them, whether it be, you know, a white woman claimed that she was raped by somebody, you know, or, you know, somebody being treated unfairly in the Black community, a white person being treated unfairly, or typically it was related to rape. You know, so a Black man was accused of rape, and that gave the neighboring white community license to come in and destroy them. And then not only that, but it was sanctioned by the state, the city, and the federal government. And so in the case of Black Wall Street, that community was actually bombed, literally bombed. So you talk about terrorist activity.
Yeah.
This was terrorism at its
Horrible.
earliest, and yeah. So
Yeah.
there's a long history of that.
Horrible. Yeah. Horrible. Absolutely horrible. So your journey then started in college, and you became more and more educated, and you continued to grow. When did you make the decision to break away from American man traditions, of changing of the name and the reasoning behind that?
Well, I was in
and
college.
what's the evolution for that? Is that and if you can give some context to that, because I think that's really important as well, because I know surnames mean a lot, right?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so I also know a little bit of education that I've had people tell me is I want to change my name because my surname was associated with slavery, you know, it ties me to that. Or, and I've had people of color tell me that. I don't know if that is their story or if that is generally a lot of individual stories. I also know that from my family history, they appreciate the surname because their surnames are given based on jobs. And so that's another area that I'm not educated with when it comes to African Americans. I don't know how that works. And and then the other question that kind of rolls into that is that plantation mentality and moving into darker skin versus lighter skin, and kind of that then turns into classism, excuse me, and better than culture. That then creates policies that keep people down.
Absolutely.
So well, I know I said a mouthful and asked lots of questions. That's just Dawn in a nutshell. But I kind of feel for me in a lot of ways they all tie in together. Because culturally, I think that's an area people need to understand about people of color is some people just don't take pride in their surname. Well, so if you can answer that, I don't if it's not too personal.
No, not at all. I'm always ready. I don't go around boasting and talking about it, but if you ask, then I'll tell you. So the context is there were Black people here before the Europeans arrived. It's again, understanding history. There were travelers, people that came, not only Black people, but there are tons of people that came to this, what's called North America, Central America. People that were wayfarers that traveled around the world. Europeans were not the only ones that traveled across the world. However, if we're talking about the sheer number of Black people that are here, that would not have happened without the process of enslavement. The process of enslavement created basically the second largest group of African people outside of Africa. That was due to the process of enslavement, and that the Western Hemisphere has a second largest group of diasporan Africans outside of Africa, and that is primarily due to the process of enslavement. And so you're talking literally centuries starting as early as the late 1400s or the mid 1400s with the Portuguese that brought some of the first Africans from the western coast of Africa into what's now Brazil and some of those other South American countries, to Spain, who brought Africans to the Caribbean islands and Central America, and even a little into the Florida Panhandle and what's now Texas and California. So when we're talking about history, understanding history again, the English were not the first people to bring Africans into what's now the United States or Central America. It was the Spanish that brought Africans into what's now considered America. And just so you know, I'm sure you know, but for your listeners to know,
I did not know that. I did not know that, and I also didn't know that. So thank you for educating me on that about the travelers, because that's not talked about either.
Yeah.
So
read a book.
Interesting.
Ivan Van Sertima. His name is Ivan Van Sertima. He has a book called "They Came Before Columbus." They Came Before Columbus by Ivan Van Sertima. So with that, understanding the reason that we're here in this country or in the Western Hemisphere, if you want to consider it broadly, is due to the process of enslavement. What came along with that? With that process of enslavement, it meant stripping a whole group of people away from everything that they knew, meaning that they were torn away from their families, they were torn away from their culture, their religious or spiritual belief systems, their language, which is the primary indicator of any culture, is your tie to the language that you speak. Obviously, your base cultural practices, all of those things were stripped away. And not only that, your humanity and your name. So the idea that you can name yourself was even stripped away. And so Malcolm X always talked about, in Africa, you don't find people with last names like Anderson or Davis or Johnson. Those people don't exist. Before European colonialism, those things didn't exist.
Well, I've been to East Africa and they still don't exist very often.
Yeah, and you'll see West Africa, you'll see a lot of Africans that have two names. Anytime you talk to them, they typically have two names. They'll have an English name, and then if you ask, they'll tell you their English name. My name's Peter, and you say, well, where are you from? I'm from Nigeria. Are you Igbo? Oh, okay. So what's your Igbo name? Oh, it's and they'll tell you, Olatunji, something.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So
makes sense.
And so they do that a lot now, but here, our history and culture was stripped away from us so much that we began to devalue that. And so we were taught that everything about Africa was backwards and rudimentary and dark and so anything that you associate with Black. And I remember even being a child and being teased by other Black kids about how dark I was. And it got to a point where I was like, yeah, I mean, I am dark, but I don't understand. Like, I remember being, 9, 10, 8, 9, 10, thinking that, it's this whole thing about me being an African booty scratcher. I don't know if you ever heard that term, but it's a big thing.
No, I haven't.
As a kid, it's a big thing when you're a kid. That's what you would get called if you're being teased. Somebody call you African booty scratcher, or they call you Black, and at some point, when they'd be like, oh, you Black, you just Black. And I would be like, yeah, I mean, yeah, I am. So I don't understand why that's so bad, but that's me. So imagine this being kind of part of the culture of always being teased for your complexion, which reinforces the hatred that you have for other people that look like you because you hate yourself. That's all trained. Those are all trained behaviors. This isn't something that just naturally came about, and that behavior was trained in us because that's what we were taught from plantation periods. Your skin is dark and ugly. You have no meaning or value. Where you come from has no meaning or value. You're better off. And I've actually heard people say that it's good that slavery happened because you know, if not for slavery, I wouldn't be here. Well, you clearly don't have an understanding of African culture and the impacts, because if Africa was so bad, Europeans would not have colonized it and took all the natural resources.
Oh yeah, yeah, like
so
80% of the world's natural resources.
Absolutely, absolutely.
80%. I think it's like 83 point something.
Absolutely.
It's nuts.
Yeah, I was going to
Yeah,
say,
it's
you
nuts.
know, higher, 85% or higher. Most of the world's
Oh, it's okay.
natural
Yeah,
resources
it's it's
come
crazy.
from Africa. Yeah. And
Yeah.
if it's so bad, you know, why are people constantly on the continent, and why are they not leaving? And why don't they allow the Africans to sustain and build
Yeah.
communities for themselves?
Yeah.
And so that
Yeah.
should tell you
No,
what
thank
the
you
reality
for
and truth
sharing
is.
that. No, thank you for sharing that. I know it's personal. I think it's important for people to understand. And I can kind of give not an example that relates, obviously, but an example that relates in the sense of, as a white individual, and is having proud, like being proud of who I am and my last name, right? So my daughter, I gave her my last name, and when I got married, I kept my last name, and because I want that her and I to have that same identity. Absolutely. And so why would we think it's weird as an American culture, or as a white culture? Why would we think it's weird that you want to have that same identity and be proud of that identity?
Well, I mean,
you know what I mean, though?
It's weird.
Like,
absolutely.
Because so for me,
weird.
It's like, wait a second, if you put into the context, like for me, if I put into the context about me and Analia, then, and my daughter, well, why is it okay for me to do it and people don't think that's weird? But then they may look at someone else and say, oh. And
well, I mean, you know, we have
that's why I wanted, I commend you for that.
Yeah, we have a thing about names that are unfamiliar. You know, and if we're talking about European immigration into this country, you'll find that a lot of the Jewish people that came, a lot of Italians that came, a lot of Scottish people and Irish people that came here, when they came here, they changed their names so that they can fit in more with the culture that was here. You know, a lot of them adjusted so that they can assimilate. Very few times, or I don't know about very few times, but it didn't happen often that, you know, people came and kept their names and they stayed proud of it. Many times they changed their names just so that they didn't have to deal with people calling their last name weird, Wojciechowski, and, you know, things of that nature. And so anytime you're talking about, and again, this all kind of ties into the fact that African culture is looked at as being backwards, as being less than, as being primitive, so on and so forth. So why would somebody want to change their name to an African name? And so, you know, I don't even think I answered your question, but I was born with the European name. You know, I had a extremely common European name, and so for me, understanding my history and culture for myself, and why it was important for me to identify with whatever it is that that I identify with, why that was important to me. I didn't want personally to have that connection to to the people that enslaved my ancestors. I didn't want anyone to ever associate me with that history and culture. I wanted to reclaim that part of our history. Basically, how do we go back and reclaim that which was taken away from us? You know, I can go back and learn African principles and practices, but one of the most clearly defined ways you can do that is by changing your name, and that's what I chose to do.
Amen.
So I did that in
seriously.
college.
No, good. You know, amen to that. That's I think it's important for people to understand that. Yeah, and it's important for people to understand that.
And,
Very
and
important.
it was a little bit of a struggle. You know, my parents didn't approve. Initially, they didn't approve, but I had to make them understand that it wasn't against you, that I did this. My parents. It wasn't against a fight against white people.
Right.
This was a choice for me. You
Right.
know,
Yeah.
I don't, the name that I went by, I didn't feel like that person was me. I did
Right.
not, that life that I lived wasn't that person. And so, you know, how do I become me? You know, how do I identify myself when I felt that I didn't have an identity with that name?
Yeah.
And
No,
so you
that's
have,
really, that's a powerful, I'm glad I asked that question because that is really powerful. And I think you just hit it, the nail on its head when you said identity, because
absolutely,
you talked about that as being a youth, and even amongst people of color with the light and the dark,
yeah,
and then the classism and the better
yeah,
and this and that, you do lose your identity, and which has been happening for
absolutely,
decades and
yeah, centuries, not decades,
yeah,
centuries.
well, yeah,
You
centuries
know,
for sure.
there's a story, you know, I don't know if you heard of it, but it's, you know, the story of Willie Lynch. You know, this and you know, people make the argument whether this is true or not, but whether it was true or not, that process is real. And so this is what happened. So Willie Lynch is supposed to be this enslaver that came from the Caribbean islands to teach, you know, the American enslavers how to run their plantations better. And so this, you know, this American enslaver was complaining about, you know, his slaves are revolting. You know, I'm just going to tell it from his perspective. When I talk about black people, I don't use slave. I don't use
Okay.
slave master. I say enslaver and
Okay.
the
No,
enslaved. They,
yeah,
you know,
no,
they
I
have an
appreciate that.
identity.
No, this is
But
all about education. No, I
yeah,
appreciate it.
yeah. So, but in relation to the story, I'm just going to share, you know, slave and master. So, you know, he wanted to make his slaves, you know, run the plantation better, less rebellions, less revolts, you know, um, more cooperation on the plantation. Um, and so, you know, what Willie Lynch did was basically say, you find any way possible that you can create differences between groups of enslaved people, groups of slaves, whether it be on the plantation or in the fields or in the house. So you take the light skinned um,
Mhm.
uh, slaves and you put them in the house. You make the dark ones work in the field. You make the old ones do this, and you make the young ones do that. And so at some point, some of the light skinned slaves would feel like their position was better than the dark skinned
Yeah.
slaves. Even if it was a dark skinned slave that worked in the house, he or she would feel like their position was better than the ones that worked in the field. And so they would do anything possible to make sure that their position was maintained. And you see that a lot, even with um, if, uh, like the early 1900s, looking at immigrants coming into the
Yeah.
country and how they were pitted against each other, how the Irish were pitted against the
Well, you
Italians,
see it in politics
and
today, right? And how policies are
absolutely,
made. It's a
absolutely,
plantation
and
mindset.
you
That's
absolutely,
exactly what it is.
and so we're
Yes.
talking about how we make the connections from the past and
Yep.
how those things happen in the past are
Yep.
constantly repeated today.
Yes.
So you're absolutely correct. You know
Yep.
how immigrants are used to pit. I mean, how people use immigrants to pit themselves against you know against immigrants to say that, you know, they're taking our jobs and they're, you know, they're rapists and they're criminals and they're, you know, this is all a ploy.
Right.
But the reality is, without immigrants coming into this country, half of the things that we take for granted we wouldn't have. They do a lot of the work that we don't want to do, and so
Well, yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
Well, and not only that, it's even looking at people of color and looking at the horrible policies that our Congress and our legislators pass, Democratic or Republican,
absolutely,
Black and white, that
absolutely,
keep poor people of color, and of course, even white people and
yep, yep,
that fall into that
absolutely,
category, it keep them all down. It keeps them
absolutely, absolutely,
all down. And because it's
absolutely.
just crap policy.
Yeah,
So,
and you see, you know, this is the kind of thing that's happened over time, and it's nothing new.
no,
It's just a way to create division, so that the people who actually have power maintain that
maintain.
power,
Yeah.
and have the people who are next to each other fight each other to try to crawl up to a level of humanity that that they can call some type of existence.
Yeah, well, that kind of leads me, and once again, thank you for sharing and why you did what you did,
Absolutely.
because I think that
Absolutely.
is really, for me, that is like I said earlier, probably one of the most important things, is identity. And when you have loss of identity, man,
You don't, and
that is
just
that is a
imagine,
struggle.
that you have, we have and we talked about this before offline, but when I mentioned that you can go from, you can be white or black, go from kindergarten all the way to PhD level and consider yourself to be educated and not have learned a thing about Black people,
Yeah.
right? How is that possible that you live in this country when Black people have contributed so much to American culture, to life? You can go from kindergarten all the way to graduate level, PhD, and not know a thing, not one thing except Martin Luther King,
Yeah.
and Black History Month, but you would be considered educated. Imagine if the shoes were reversed, if we did not have to learn a thing about European history and culture, but we can go all the way through graduate school and be considered educated. That wouldn't happen. They
It wouldn't.
revoke your PhD. Like, how can you possibly not know about the European Renaissance and the great works of the American Revolution and the industrial age and all of
Yeah.
these things
Oh yeah.
that
Boston Tea Party,
contributed
everything. Yeah.
everything, right?
Yeah.
And so
Absolutely.
yeah, and so you there's a identity is everything, and so I think people have to find that for themselves. It's not a measure in my eyes. It's not a measure of me saying, you could forget about your whiteness. No, I don't want you to forget your whiteness. I want you to understand who you are, so that you can have a better understanding of who everybody else is. So don't forget about your Native Americanness or your indigenous or your Hispanic history and culture or Latino history and culture. You need to find out more about that, but also broaden your perspective based on that knowledge. And that's what I did. That's what helped me understand and respect history. I hated history in high school, but understanding Black history and culture helped me to appreciate
Who
other
you
people's
are.
history.
Yeah,
Yeah,
who you
it helped
are.
me
Be
appreciate who I am,
comfortable.
but it also helped me
Yeah.
appreciate other people's history. So now, I have a context when they're talking about, the age of the European Renaissance. I can talk about what Africans were doing during the time of the European Renaissance, right? When the conquistadors were destroying, Spain, I can talk about, what the Africans were doing during that period of time because I have context, because I
That's
have an
pretty cool.
identity,
Yeah, that's really
right?
cool because I have no idea.
I mean, but that's what's important. I mean, if you have your foundation, and that's the whole psychology of African-centered education, African-centered belief systems, all of those things. It's not that I think that European history and culture is crap or whatever. No, the focus is I have myself and my people at the center of our existence, because that's how history and culture and everything naturally goes. The only place that we see where Black people are not centered in who they are is in America, right? Because we were taught not to have that center. Every group of people, the Jewish people, Italians, any Europeans, they have the center. Their center is their culture and who they are. And then from there, you can broaden your perspective about
Yeah, that's
what
a
everybody
really
else is
valid
doing.
point. That's a really, really,
Yeah,
really valid point that I've never thought about.
yeah.
And I
And
think
it's
we
important
talked
that you
about that.
maintain that.
It is
Yeah,
hugely important. I think we talked offline about that, and it was really just because of the horrible race relations happening in my small little town, which I'm not going to get into, but me not realizing my own um, biases and my own innate
mm-hmm.
systemic racism that I had, that I didn't
Mm-hmm.
even know I had. And I just said to
Mm-hmm.
you, like, hey, I'm sorry. Like, I apologize to a few of my friends that I love dearly. And, I didn't apologize to them as, oh, I'm sorry, I'm white. I don't know. Well, no shit. Everyone knows I'm white.
Right. Right.
You know, I'm not apologizing for that. I'm proud to be an American and that, but the fact that I didn't understand and nor did I really try to understand. And you were absolutely right, because I never took the time, and until it hit me personally, and then that it really truly opened my eyes, and for me to say,
Yeah.
oh wow, this is what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important for me to talk about this, because it shouldn't take it till it hits someone personally.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
that for me is the reason why I'm like, all right, you came to my mind and I said, we got to do this, because
Yeah.
it affected me so much, because it did hit me personally. And I'm
Yeah.
like, no, it just shouldn't. And I know I'm a good person. I know I'm not a bad
Yeah.
person. I don't think
Absolutely.
people that have those kind of, because that's the culture we grow up in, they're
Yeah.
not bad people.
Right. Right.
And so I think that, like what you said, which leads me into, I want to talk a little bit, I want to hear your thoughts on the cancel culture situation going on, and is it gone too far or whatnot. But I'm really enlightened by this conversation, because it's really bringing it to the forefront of why you're doing what you're doing. And I think a lot of people think it's like you just said, you're like, I don't hate European culture and this, and like, I'm not trying to attack this and that. I'm not like, if
It's not.
that's who,
As
and
an
I think a
aside,
lot
I
of
think,
people have those ideas, and they're
yeah,
looking and saying, oh, well, they're racist. They don't want to celebrate this or do that, or,
absolutely.
and so I mean, I didn't, like PSA, I never thought that. However,
Absolutely. Yeah.
but you know what I'm saying? Like,
Absolutely.
I think it's important.
Listen,
And
I think Shakespeare is one of the dopest artists in the world. Like, you know what I mean? His writing is dense, but I dig Shakespeare. I'm African centered to the core. I mean, look, I have what's considered European. I was born and raised in America, but it's not about the way I dress or
it's your
how I speak.
soul, yeah, your
It's
spirit.
about my existence, and it would be ignorant and foolish of me to deny other people's greatness because I'm upset about what they did to us. You know what I mean? You have to have a base understanding that yes, these things happen. We always speak in truth. We always speak in fact, and we always speak in truth. And so you have to understand that Europeans have gone all over the world, conquered, killed, slaughtered, maimed, raped people all over the world, and did so in the name of European culture, and did so in the name of God in many cases. That's fact. Can't deny that. But to say that all Europeans are bad, that would be foolish. That's not fact, right? But let's be factual and clear so that we can have a basis for creating change. If people aren't willing to have a conversation, this is one reason why American culture is so why we in America are so caught up on racism, is because we're never able or have not been willing to have that conversation openly, have that conversation about the
Yeah.
existence of racism and white supremacy in this country and around the world. And if people, you see in Germany when they had the slaughter of millions of Jewish people, they owned up to it, and they banned the swastika, any flags that represent that swastika. You will be put in jail if you have tattoos of
Yeah.
that. If they ban, it's a hate crime.
But the Confederate
to
flag is still here.
you see what I'm saying? And so
Yeah, that we talked
so
about that too at my daughter's
you own
school.
up to it,
Yeah.
and to listen to people whose existence is different than yours, a perspective that's different than yours. We're not able to do that in this country. And as soon as you bring up something about racism, then people are like, "Oh, here you're playing the race card." Well, no, there's a reality that you are not understanding. And if you deny my existence, which is the whole point of Black Lives Matter, we're not
Yeah,
saying Black lives
that
are better.
I know
We're not
that
saying that
does.
that Black people are superior. We're saying Black lives matter. We're
Yeah.
just asking for an acknowledgement of our existence, right?
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
to
Yeah. No,
deny
that is
that,
one of.
yeah, to have a difficulty with people saying, all lives matter or blue lives matter.
It's like,
Okay,
yeah, we get that. Okay, right. But
if you really felt like all lives matter, then we would not have a reason to have Black
Black
Lives
Lives
Matter.
Matter.
And the
Right.
fact that you bring up Blue Lives Matter tells me that you don't value Black lives and that all lives don't matter because you're bringing up Blue Lives Matter. And the fact blue lives isn't a color, it's a color, it's a t-shirt, it's a shirt color. It's not a,
It's a it's
it's
a
not a
job.
culture.
It's a
It's a
job.
job, right? And
Right.
so,
Right.
so we have issues in this country that won't be fixed unless we can be honest and
Yeah.
clear about the problems that we're facing.
Yeah.
We'll always
No,
have those problems because
yeah,
people don't want to
no,
come to the
that's a
table.
very valid point.
Yeah.
That's a very valid
So
point.
you were talking about this cancel culture, stuff like you had mentioned
Yeah, like, I don't
like
know if you've been
Aunt
reading,
Jemima,
I mean,
like yeah,
yeah,
like you like the Aunt Jemima and
yeah,
people
yeah.
uh
And then now they
uh
got rid of Big Boy, I guess. Now they have a doll, like now they have a girl Dolly, and they're
oh, see, I
getting,
didn't know about that.
yeah. My husband actually called me yesterday. He's like, "Oh, I just saw Dolly." I'm like, "Who is Dolly?" He's like, "Remember I told you they got rid of Big Boy and now it's a girl named Dolly." And I'm like,
Oh yeah,
"Oh,
see, I know.
yeah."
Yeah.
And
I,
so it's like, when is too much, right? You're
yeah.
taking down
Yeah.
statues of Jefferson. And no, don't get me wrong. I'm okay with taking down, like, but demolishing them in a bunch of young, like, I mean, who's doing it? A bunch of young
Yeah.
white
Right.
punks,
Right.
right? I mean,
Right.
it's not even like people that have that deep understanding and belief that you're talking about. So for me,
Right.
that's where it's coming from, right? Is
Right.
like,
And again, and
that's
that's
why
where
I want
that
to know what your
conversation.
thought.
Yeah.
That's why I want to know
Yeah.
what your thought is, because okay, take them down, but still, that preserve them and put them in a museum.
Right.
I mean, but
So
you know,
yeah, I've heard people talk. We're talking about Thomas Jefferson. You need to understand his history. So Thomas Jefferson isn't a beacon of light for everybody, right?
no, he's not.
Um, and so yes, he's done a lot to establish his country, and that's one thing that I have to respect, even as a black man that knows that a lot of the founding fathers were enslavers.
Mhm.
The shit, can I cuss?
I
Sorry,
did.
I'm
I don't
sorry.
know. I did.
The
I don't
stuff
know.
that they did, the stuff that they did to remake this area and this land into a nation that fit them is absolutely revolutionary. You can't deny that. You can't deny the fact that they created something out of nothing. They fought against a superpower and they won. And not only that, but they created a whole system of government and a way of living that made life possible for literally millions of people to this day. So to deny that is to deny facts. Again, we have to deal in facts. But you have to consider everything has to be in context. Washington, Jefferson, many of the founding fathers were enslavers, and so at the very same time that they're talking freedom, justice, liberty, equality, pursuit of happiness, all those things for all men, all men are created equal. At the very same time, they were oppressing and enslaving thousands of people, millions of people, or hundreds of thousands of people during that period of time. They kept people as property. They did not. They specifically, and in fact, at the founding of the creation of the Constitution, it was a decision to not allow Black people to be considered people, fully citizens, only for the right,
Interesting.
only for the purpose of for representation did they allow any type of existence. But Black people weren't considered humans; they were considered property. They were on the same level as chattel, a cow, or a rake, or something that if you lost it, or in this case if it died, you can just get another one. And so you can't at one instance say
That is just so
we want life,
disgusting.
liberty, and justice for everybody, but then deny and a whole group of people that is everybody, and those people be considered human beings, right? So they had to, that if you think about it, the whole question of slavery is not even addressed in the Constitution. It's not even in the Constitution, right? The only thing that they say is that slavery, any property would be considered 3/5, right? 3/5 of a human being. So in order for counting for representation purposes, the South had more people because they were enslaving more people. And so those people in the South, those Africans in the South would be considered 3/5, so that they wouldn't have full representation, and the South wouldn't have more power than than the North in terms of representation in Congress. And so you can't fully deny a group of people existence and then say you want
I didn't know that detail.
Equality. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, right. You can't say you want justice and equality for everybody, but deny a whole group of people that same
Right.
justice and equality you fought for yourself. So here's to answer your question. We need to know about that. We need to know about the full story of Jefferson. We need to know his contributions to creating the Constitution and the U.S. government. But we also need to know about the fact that he enslaved people, that he raped many of his enslaved women, had children with primarily one of his enslaved women, had fathered something like 4, 5, 6 children with her, but also raped other so-called slaves. And so all of that needs to be said. And I've seen people say that take the statue down. We don't need to honor his legacy in that way. But Monticello is still available. His home is still up. It's a museum, and so you can talk about his history and his legacy at the museum, and that can tell a full picture of his existence, right? So you're not canceling his existence at all. It's all in context, right? Because Jefferson and Washington isn't a monument of hope and a beacon of freedom for everybody.
Right.
So when you see a statue of Washington, some people may see pride in the founding of the country. Other people may see this is the person who is responsible for our enslavement.
Right.
This is the person who was responsible for making sure that our territories were taken over. And codified the existence of or the destruction of our communities. And so all those things have to be. You can't deny that simply because we want to uphold the legacy of the founding fathers. All right.
Right.
However,
Right.
let me say one more thing. The people that have, or the cities and the states that have monuments of Confederate soldiers and leaders, that's the question that we really have to. Do we even? These are people that openly fought in rebellion against the United States government. So you have army bases or military bases named after Confederate leaders. You have statues and monuments devoted to these same people that were in rebellion against, who were killing American soldiers. But you have a problem with taking those down. But you claim to be an American, but you have a problem with taking those down. If you're an American, then you should respect the fact that these people fought against America.
Yeah, they wanted to keep their states. Yeah,
they wanted to keep their way of life, and they literally started a war to preserve that way of life. And in starting a war, they killed American people. They killed U.S. Army. They killed U.S. people, right? And so, how do you justify saying that you're an American and you're proud of America, but you uphold people who are in rebellion against the Union? I know it's not really about you loving America. It's not about that. It's about you want to maintain that history of discrimination and racism, because the only reason that the Civil War was fought, the primary reason the Civil War was fought, was to preserve the process of enslavement, period. And if we can't, again, face that as a fact and truth, then we're not being sincere. So when you have people who talk about the Confederate flag as a symbol of heritage in my history and culture, heritage from what? History about what? Let's dig in deeper that. Oh, it's about states' rights. States' rights for what?
right.
What did the states wanted to have rights to continue doing? Oh, we just wanted to maintain our freedom. Freedom to do what? Right? So let's dig in deeper. Let's really get sincere and honest about this. Because if we're talking about, it's history and heritage and states' rights, and we want to maintain our freedom, it's your freedom, your history and heritage and your states' rights directly impacted people of color, right?
Yeah, no, I
Specifically Black
agree.
people.
I agree. I got a couple more questions for you and then we'll wrap it up because I know it's getting long and I appreciate you telling your truth and I
Absolutely.
agree 100%. So one of the questions with regard to the statues is, and when you look and you see the individuals that are out there doing graffiti and tearing them down and protesting and doing all these things, they're young 20-some white individuals.
Mm.
And do you think that it is more beneficial for them to do that? Or do you think it'd be more beneficial for a group of allies to get together and say, okay, why don't we write a bill, work with the legislator to get it passed so then we can take down the statues we want to take down and the ones we want to preserve, we preserve, and then get a national lobbying firm or whatever the case may be to stand behind it?
Yeah.
I mean, what do you think would be more beneficial for the country as a whole?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's actually legislation. I cannot remember to save my life. There's legislation that's been introduced that addresses police reform and equity and communities where that inequality exists. There's a specific name for the bill.
Oh,
I
I
remember.
didn't know. I'll check it out. So
Yeah, I remember Cory Booker and
oh
I
yes,
believe
yes.
Kamala Harris. They were working to introduce that bill, and so that's a the question you asked is
Do you find that more beneficial for the overall
overall, yes,
health,
absolutely,
the overall mental health, the overall safety, the overall? I
absolutely,
think there's
absolutely.
nothing wrong with protesting.
So
When
right,
people start, I mean, well, I hate to say it, but the riots, but our history does show when people riot, that's when change happens as
and
well.
that's the part that I was going to say. You're talking about something that's it's complicated to answer that question easily. Martin Luther King said, uh, I'm gonna paraphrase, but writing is a language of the unheard.
Yeah.
And so when you're talking about, typically historically, the riots that have happened has come about because people were fed up. Now, as it relates to Black people, we don't have these, we don't control these a lot of systems of government. We don't control the land or the territory, and so you know when you value the property and value other things more than you do the life of the person who we're protesting about, then you see the results of that. But fast forward to situations like today, where you see a lot of young white kids, and it's not all white kids. There's I've seen
No.
some some I've seen some where like in New York, I've seen all of them.
Yeah.
Damn near everybody was out. It was a United Nations of
Yeah.
destruction happening in New York. But you there's been a lot of evidence that has shown that a lot of people come from the suburbs just to destroy stuff. I've seen a couple of videos where some people who were spray painting walls and throwing bricks in windows, they were accosted by some of the peaceful
Yeah, I
protesters
did
saying like,
too.
why are you doing this? Like don't come here destroying our you live in the
Yeah,
suburbs. Don't
I
come here
did see
destroying our
that.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
it was some young girls that were Black that went up to these young white
yep.
boys like,
Yep.
stop, like we're doing a peaceful
Yep.
protest and
Yep.
then we're gonna get blamed for it. And
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
and they taped it, which I thought was awesome. Yeah, I did see
Yep.
that too.
Yep. So I mean, we have a complicated, thing to. I don't. I believe personally, I think that we need to create policies. We need to mobilize as a collective to say these are things that we need to change. And protesting, although it does make it notable, bring light to these situations that have been happening around the country. we're always protesting. I'm looking to see substantive change, and you do substantive change through creating policies like you were talking about. And so I'm more so of the mind that, not to say that I won't ever participate in the protest, but I'd be more willing to do the heavy lifting in terms of, creating principles, policies, initiatives like Black Education and Legacy that will do more to empower our community long term. And this is change that I don't even anticipate us seeing in my lifetime, but that work needs to be done. And so, I'm more apt to sit on a panel or be in a group in the dark room talking about what can we do so that we can empower the Black community, so that when situations like this happen, there's recourse. They have legal and financial recourse to deal with police brutality, as opposed to us, getting up in arms and going to march, and then 2 days later, everything's back to order, and then a month later it happens again.
Yeah.
This is a vicious cycle that keeps repeating, and we can't keep doing the same thing and expect a different result. That's the definition of insanity. And so, I want to make it clear, I'm not opposed to protest. I think it has its place, but we need to do more than just protest.
Yeah.
And then,
No,
as far as
100%.
restoring property, we got to be conscious of that. I don't when destruction of property happens, I'm not as upset as when someone's life is lost.
Okay, say that.
I'm more focused on the fact that somebody's life was lost, and the fact that somebody destroyed a property that can be restored. You can't.
I agree.
Ahmaud Arbery's life, Breonna Taylor's life, George Floyd's life can't be restored. They're gone. They're dead. So the fact that we're more upset about property being destroyed and not about the fact that they're dead, that needs to be taken into context. So.
Yeah. And, like we both mentioned offline and just, about a few minutes ago, is Americans' history, things start to change after riots happen.
Absolutely.
And so, not that I am
the whole American Revolution was a riot.
And not that I'm over here supporting riots. That's just the way history is. But
the whole American Revolution was a riot.
Yeah. Well, and I'm not much of one to I've done my share of protesting, but I'm there with you that I would rather write policy and be on a panel or whatnot and say, okay, let's just get to doing and creating and push it through, or try to make some kind of legislation change. So yeah. Well, so I want to end the call once again. Thank you so much for this, and it's been enlightening to me. So I hope for our listeners and those that watch this, it's enlightening for them. Yeah. Oh my gosh. So I definitely will have you on another month as well, talking about another topic, because you have lots of gifts and talents. But I do want to know if you have, my pleasure. If you have any call to actions, or what can we do as individuals? And I'm not even going to say white people, Black people, whatever, but just as people, because I think there's a lot of things that individuals can do, and everyone can do something at a different level and for different reasons. And so I didn't know if you wanted to leave us with a call of action, or a book to read, or
I can do it all.
Because it's got to, you know what I mean? Like it's got to be more than just watching a video or reading a book.
Absolutely.
But so I would like to end that way.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So if you're white, it's important that you don't have to go around apologizing all day.
Sorry,
it's good. I have a no. I'm not talking to you specifically. I have a few friends who are really empathetic, white friends, that have called me and said, "Hey, are you okay? I see what's going on. Are you okay?" And we pay attention to that. It's important to acknowledge that Black people are going through some things, and not everybody, but a lot of Black people are going through some things. It's almost kind of PTSD-ish. It's a lot of stress and trauma to see people who look just like you. And I mean, I have a personal story related to George Floyd. The fact in terms of how he looked like a close family member, and to see his life get taken away, that's stressful. It's traumatic. And to see that perpetually happening again and again, just imagine if this happened to you and nothing was ever done about it. People that look like you. Just imagine, women were being beaten by the police and nothing was ever done about it. They go to trial and they get off, and you feel a certain kind of way about it.
Well, yeah, you'd be afraid
So
to go anywhere by yourself or to
absolutely,
drive or do
absolutely,
anything, for sure.
absolutely, and that's our existence.
Yeah.
I have two sons, and I worry more about them than I do about myself. But we shouldn't have to worry about that. And so if you're white, you genuinely show gratitude and support, and just ask, are you okay? And just making yourself aware that letting them know that you're aware of what's going on, and that they have an ear in you, they have an ally in you. And more importantly, I think it's very important that if you're white, you have conversations away from Black people, not while Black people are around, that challenges the status quo of your whiteness, so that when you have that uncle or your friend who says something that's even slightly racist or discriminatory, that you check and challenge them and not allow things like that to slide, because you're comfortable, with your person, or you don't want to make your friendship or your relationship uncomfortable. We've been in this country for 400 years uncomfortable, and we've had to try to find a way to fight through it. And so it's really up to white people to be allies away from Black people. You can
Yeah,
post.
that's really powerful. That's
Yeah,
really, yeah.
you can. The posts are great, but the conversations are more important. The conversation that you have that gets to that uncomfortable space where you're addressing issues of disparity, racism, inequality with the family member that or with the friend that that has these views that you're opposed with, but you don't want to have that conversation because you don't want to strain the relationship. Those are the conversations that are really important, right? Because those are the ones that let people know I can't talk like this. And if there are more people who are not willing to hear that conversation or to address a situation that's not right, then people will be less willing to talk that way. And then hopefully, we hope that they'll start to change their philosophy, because everybody's thinking this way. But as long as people know that, as long as I'm around my friends or my family, I can say what I want, and they might not say nothing, but I can say whatever I want. Then you don't have any change. That's what's important. And then obviously, reading is important. I pulled out 2 books, but there's a plethora of books that are that you can go. I think Howard Zinn's book, Zinn, Howard Zinn, his book, A People's History of the United States, should be required reading in middle, high school, and college.
What is it again? Howard
Zinn, Zinn.
Yep.
A People's History of the United States is an absolutely profound study of from the period of. In fact, the subtitle is 1492 to the present. Starting with Columbus, and the fact that if you're thinking about him as a discoverer, how should he be remembered? Should he be remembered as a person who discovered America, where he actually never stepped foot in North America, never once stepped foot in North America? So why are we honoring him as a discoverer of North America?
Interesting.
He never stepped foot in North America. He traveled all the Caribbean islands and made his way to Central America, but never once stepped foot in North America, and what's now the United States. So why are we honoring him, right? But also the fact that when he first encountered with the indigenous people in what's now the Dominican Republic and Haiti, his first encounter, within minutes or maybe hours, these people coming and approaching the ship and offering gifts and welcoming him. His first few minutes of encountering these peaceful people, his first thought was, "Oh, we can slaughter them. We can slaughter them people and take over their land. This will be easy. Within a few years, we can take over all of this stuff." His first encounter, and then he went on to do it. Not only did he think about it, he went on to do it. He slaughtered the vast majority of every group of native people that he came across in most of those islands that he traveled to. And so these are stories that have to be told. And so the other book, if you're looking to understand how the justice system negatively and adversely affects and impacts Black people, you got to read Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, a book called The New Jim Crow. And I think you're familiar with that book.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, yeah.
Yeah, and so that will give you a lot of great context about the current state of affairs and how the psychology of Black people, the criminalization of Black people, and the fact that Black people have harsher sentences, are arrested sooner, are killed when they have encounters with police more, how all of those things have come to being. Right.
As a matter of fact, I just read an article in the Detroit Free Press early this morning or yesterday about a young African-American lady who was in high school. She's a sophomore, and she was 16. She had a charge from when she was 13, and she went to Beverly Hills School, so just in Oakland County, just right outside of Detroit. And part of her probation, 3 years later, still on probation, it was a larceny or whatnot. Either way, she also had post-traumatic stress. Her diagnoses, I believe, were post-traumatic stress, ADHD. And long story short from this article was she ended up going to detention because within the first week of the online schools, she didn't do her work. And so her caseworker contacted the department, which contacted the judge. And the teacher was like, no, she's no different than any other 16-year-old. And also given her diagnoses, like she's non-stimulated, she can't sit still. Long story short, she's sitting in detention in Wayne County.
Yep.
And the title was called The New Jim Crow. And I was just I just read about it. And like I said, I don't know if you've seen the article, but I just thought, I'm like, this is just ridiculous. Total disgusting, total abuse.
Yeah, and that happens a lot. The mechanisms of justice don't view the same crime, the same instances where, someone steals, for example. If you steal a shirt from Macy's, if you're white, if this is your first offense, you're more likely to have probation. If you're Black and this is your first offense, you're more likely to be charged. And this happens across the board. We can look at every point of contact with the judicial system. There are disparities in the way that Black people are treated within that system. So, and a lot of those cases result in death, unfortunately. Simply because they're Black. So,
or mental health. I mean, let's get real. And which is another form of death, in my opinion.
Yep.
So last few final words, Kamau. I want to thank you again. This has been very enlightening for me. Absolutely. And I appreciate you.
Yeah, I appreciate you too, Dawn.
I appreciate, it's been fun, and I've always been able to be open and talk with you.
And that's what's needed most.
And I think, like you said, it's all about having an open conversation, and so I definitely appreciate you taking time out of your day today to speak with me and not only educate me, because I have made the decision I want to learn and grow every day, and hopefully educate others that make that same decision, and that they choose to take the cotton out and take the biases out of their mind and listen.
And that's what's needed most. Just being open and listen. I know we have our built-in perceptions and ideas, but we don't all agree,
and it's
we all
okay.
have a different experience. And that's absolutely okay. That's the most critical part. It's okay that we disagree, but just listen. That's all. That's what's most important.
Any final words before we sign off?
No, we're good. I'm happy. I think we covered a large territory. I hope people get something of value. I hope I was able to offer something of value to
oh my gosh,
and your people.
You did.
And I appreciate it. So
you did. You did. Well, thank you so much, and stay safe, and love to you and your family.
Likewise. Thank
All
you as
right.
well. I appreciate you.
All
All
right.
right.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.